And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. As always, I am joined by Rick Unger, Heather Hansen, and the Rabbi Brad Hirschfield. Should voting be mandatory? President Obama floating the idea yesterday.
In Australia and some other countries, there's mandatory voting. It would be transformative if everybody voted. That would counteract money more than anything. If everybody voted, then it would completely change the political map in this country. Because the people who tend not to vote are young, they're lower income, they're skewed more heavily towards immigrant groups and minority groups.
In other words, they're basically Democrats, as Rick just whispered. Yes, Mr. President, most people who don't vote probably would vote for a Democratic ticket if you force them to the polls. If I'm running the DNC, me likey that idea. Brad, do we really want people being forced to vote when they're not compelled to?
It feels pretty undemocratic to me, not to mention that not voting is also a political statement. To not vote is an action, and paying attention to that is really important. Also, we should remember, the history of pre-qualifying voters in this country is not so good, right? We did that with whole classes of people and kind of lived to be deeply ashamed of it. So it seems to me that pre-qualification, however well-intentioned or cynical, I'm probably 50-50 on this one with the president, is not a good idea. The one thing also I would say is he's right. It would be transformative if everyone did vote. But the transformation, if it's coerced, versus the transformation, if it's voluntary, is profound.
You make an excellent point about not voting can be your voice as well. There was a whole South Park episode on this. There was the Pete Diddy, the Vote or Die campaign, and he literally was going around town like threatening to kill people if they didn't go to the polls, and they were voting on a school mascot, and you had to choose between a turd and a female product.
Be careful.
Right?
Okay,
I couldn't say the second one.
Now.
But the point being, though, that Stan didn't want to vote for either because he's, I don't believe in either, and they forced him to the polls because voting's so important. So your thoughts?
Well, that's why we're different, and that's why we can't do it, because it's a First Amendment right. You have a First Amendment right not to speak, and if you have a choice between, say, Elizabeth Warren and Rick Santorum, and you don't want to vote at all, that is your First Amendment right. That's why I don't think it will ever happen here. It's interesting, Rupert Murdoch actually tweeted today in response to President Obama's
Australian,
statement.
by the way.
From Australia.
No, he's American now.
Originally from Australia.
Right. And he said that he actually thinks it's a good idea. And that President Obama may be surprised by who would actually turn up. There's a book called Compulsory Voting For and Against by Jason Brennan that talked about the people that would actually do the voting, and it's not exactly what President Obama might think. It's working class white people, and they are usually less educated, yes, but also much more socially conservative. So you might see a Democratic Party that moves to the right and a totally different type of election.
You happen to be right. I was kidding about Democrats, but in fact, what you just said is correct. The research shows that it would probably be about a wash politically, so that's a very fair point. Look, this is an interesting topic. You've got the political side of it, which I think does solve itself based on the data you have there, and then the legal side. And this is something that would keep Heather and I busy for days, because you could make some really compelling arguments constitutionally. You know, what I brought up to Heather earlier, I go, well, why is it constitutional to force people to serve jury duty? You know, what if I don't want to? What if I don't believe it? And by the way, the easy solution to the point you raised, Rabbi, is you could certainly have an entry on a ballot, I don't like anybody.
But can I?
You could, but the experience of being forced into that voting booth has some very weird resonances.
I take the point.
And I think that that's the thing. To the extent that the president is right, it would be transformative. The greatness of its transformation would be if it was freely chosen.
So Heather's
and
got
politicians
a
don't
point on
want
the
to admit
Constitution.
Well, the First Amendment, it includes not being forced to go to the voting booth and do that. And if you look at the countries, I mean,
But
yes.
why does it allow them to force me to go have
But
to
jury
serve
duty is, you know, I looked into this because it is an interesting issue and it's complicated, but jury duty is, there's nothing in the Constitution. You are entitled to a trial by jury.
Yes.
But there's nothing, the 13th Amendment arguably says that they can't force
That's
you
right.
to do something.
That's
you
right.
get paid for jury
And
duty.
yet they do. There's a federal
It's-
statute that requires you to pay a fine
and
or
it's
go to jail.
State by state, really, that really compels you to be there. But if you look at the places that do it, Australia does it well. But you've got Argentina, you've got
they have
Egypt,
problems.
you've got
There's
Lebanon,
downsides. There are.
a lot of problems. And Switzerland, which has the lowest turnout rate, is probably one of the best governed.
There is some middle ground here that we're not hitting, which is why not change election day to Sunday?
Or have a day
or,
off.
or Saturday, or a day off. That would make it easier for people to go. There is some middle
I think a lot
ground
of people
here.
agree with that. Let me go back to the legal point for a second. How would this happen if in other words, who would have to initiate this sort of initiative?
It'd be a
And-
constitutional amendment.
It would be.
Yeah.
Okay. And Republicans would
And,
obviously
and
be
the,
against it,
the
despite the
president
research
pointed
you
that
just
out,
shared.
by the way. The president did point that out in his speech yesterday. It would require that.
None of the above is interesting because that happened in a movie called Brewster's Millions with
That's
Richard
right.
Pryor back in 1983.
That's
And it was
right.
vote none of the above, and he actually won the New York City mayor's
We're
race.
the only
If
two
you
people who
freely-
saw that movie, apparently. I love that
It's a short list.
And nobody ever knows that movie, and I think it's hysterical.
With
Richard
John
Pryor,
Candy.
man,
Yeah,
and
it's a
John
good
Candy.
movie.
That's
yeah.
right, and none of the above won.
If you freely choose it, I back it. If not, no.
There you go. Well, coming up next, we look at our favorite stories of the day during Potluck. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax TV.